Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's installment of our virtual brown bag series for the College of Engineering here at UTA. We're glad you're with us today. A couple housekeeping items before we get started. We will be able to take any of your questions and stuff. If you just type them in the Q&A bar on the top of your screen or top right of your screen, we'll get to those. I'll be moderating those as we go through. Also, be sure to check out our entire schedule of virtual brown bag series. You can see all the ones that we've done before. You can also see what's coming up and kind of make your plans accordingly. We're proud today to have an alumni spotlight, Marc Waco, who's a principal in operations improvement at PricewaterhouseCoopers. He's an alum of UTA's Industrial Manufacturing and Systems Engineering Department. He has over 25 years of industry and consulting experience and currently leads PwC's digital operations team, which integrates engineering, procurement, manufacturing, and supply chain information to help companies optimize their end-to-end operations performance. It's a lot for me to say. I'm sure he has a much better handle on it. So Marc, I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, well, thanks, Jeremy. You see me okay? I'm coming through clear?
Loud and clear, yes.
Okay, awesome. Well, yeah, it's not the Outstanding Alumni Award, but I'll take the brown bag. So thanks for the invitation. And I would say on my intro, I couldn't have written it better myself. So appreciate you giving that intro. So as Jeremy said, I'm with PwC and I'm a consultant. So today I want to talk about how I got there, because I wasn't born a consultant and I actually didn't come out of college as a consultant. Got into it later on. So we'll talk about that. Just a little plug for the brown bag. So I did go back and look at some of the brown bag, the alumni spotlights, just to get a sense of what folks talk about. And I'd say it's pretty amazing. It's pretty amazing, some of the alums that have come through with these unbelievably deep capabilities and just really leading in their fields and software and aeronautics and other engineering spaces. And, you know, this speaks to the power of specialization. And for me, I would say there's a million ways to succeed in life. You're all going to find your own way. Mine is consulting. I think it's also a specialized skill. But instead of perfecting it at one company, you know, or one career, consulting, you kind of reinvent yourself and you are solving new problems all the time. And you're working at many different companies and countries. I've worked, I went back, I'm an engineer, so I'm a little bit detail oriented. I've worked at 61 different companies in consulting and done 169 projects at those companies. So you get a lot of diversity in this career. It's kind of like in a way, consulting, it preceded the gig economy, I would say. But you know, if you think about companies hire consultants because they have problems or initiatives, and they don't have the skills related to that. Sometimes it's implementing technology, and maybe they only do that once every 10 years, 15 years. Sometimes it's to take on new ways of running their business, and they want to know how other companies do it. So there's certain skills that consultants have just based on their experience that are different than the people who are running the business, and that's the role of consultants. And I think in the future, more and more people are changing jobs and having consulting-like roles. I read this weekend that, and you're all about to be college grads, but the average college grad will change jobs between 12 and 15 times over the course of their career. So it's not the 169 times that I've changed, but it's a lot more than you know, many of the companies and peers that I have changed jobs over their career. So I think consulting's never been more mainstream, and that's the topic I wanted to talk about today. I call it, I scratched out consulting and I said, let's really talk about operations, because operations is what I do. I personally think that if you look at where the United States economy is today and where you think it's going to go in the future, you may not believe that I believe we'll be manufacturing things in the future in the US. But even if you don't believe that, we're for sure going to be moving things around in supply chains, and we're for sure going to need information to manage manufacturing and supply chains. So that's what I do, and that's what I wanted to talk about today. So that said, let me jump into a little bit of history. So I mentioned earlier that I sat through some of the sessions, and I thought it was pretty cool that these people had photos of themselves when they were at UTA. But then I look back at my photos, and they were mostly of parties and things. And so I didn't think that was really appropriate for my session today. I know I liked Dr. Wendy Acolo. She had this photo of her, and she had to study so much that she had abutted her desk to her bed so she could be studying at all times. I wasn't quite like that, but obviously you don't get a degree in engineering by going to parties all the time. We just didn't have as many cameras back then when I was in school. It was, you had to carry a camera with you separate from your phone, and most people didn't do that. But this is a legacy from my days at UTA. This is my Mac that I had when I was a senior, and I can remember very distinctly doing all-nighters with this Mac, driving my roommate crazy because I had a dot matrix printer that was kind of right against the wall where his headboard was. So definitely would keep him awake. And now I've got this actually sitting in my home office to remind me of those days. But anyway, when you look back at your arc of experience over your career, there's going to be certain things that stand out from each era. And for me, UTA was really about learning to learn. I definitely got the fundamentals of industrial engineering, planning techniques and optimization and all those kinds of things. But for my job anyway, and really probably for anybody's job, the trick to success is not to go in with book smarts, but the trick to success is figuring out how to apply those fundamentals within a whole bunch of different constraints. And the constraints are really within the company that you happen to be working at. So, they have processes, they have people that work there that have opinions, they have systems that manage their data, and you can't go in and expect to move the needle while ignoring all of those things. So you have to learn how to understand how to apply the fundamentals within these constraints in order to make improvement. That's what consultants do. That's what industrial engineers do. I'll talk a little bit about my first job here in a sec, but just background-wise, I wasn't originally an industrial engineer. I was originally a double E, and then I decided to switch over because I liked that industrial engineering was a lot about making change and improvement. And I had one professor that kind of stood out for me. Her name was Dr. Eleanor Pape, and I had transferred into industrial engineering. She reached out, kind of put a human face on the department and also the profession, which definitely made a difference for me, and gave me some understanding of what I was getting into. If you're like me, didn't really have a good understanding of what engineers were going to do. The reason I was a double E is I had a friend family friend that was an executive at a semiconductor company, and he figured that all engineers were going to be successful and were pretty homogeneous. I was a little bit different than him, but I think another point that stood out to me and sort of set the course for me, at least in consulting, was we had to take a class. I think it was called Engineering Economics, something like that, but we had to get a subscription to the Wall Street Journal and read the Wall Street Journal. And so that was the first time I ever heard about this career called consulting, as I'm reading an article at UTA in the sub. I can distinctly remember it, and it was talking about how all of these kids are coming out of college, going into consulting firms, making a lot of money, and they think they know everything. And I thought, that sounds pretty good. I'm sure the article was meant to be pejorative and kind of ridiculing those kids, but I thought it was pretty cool to be able to go in and change things and also make a lot of money. I don't know if you guys need money, but I thought it would be good to have some money. So I was really interested in consulting, and I think I stored that away in my memory. Didn't necessarily act on it right away, but that was the first time I had really heard about consulting. And so from there, after graduation, I went into building airplanes and worked at this company called, at first it was called LTV. And literally when I accepted the offer, they filed bankruptcy. And but they were a division called Vought, which was then bought by Carlyle Group, which then was bought by Northrop Grumman, and then became Triumph. I think it's still Triumph today. But aerospace has undergone a lot of changes over the last couple of decades, big changes, and even changing the business models of the company, or of the industry rather. But my first job, I mean, first off, the reason I got it was they came to UTA looking for engineers, and they happened to, have a factory not far from the campus at that time. And I was building the 747, 757, and 767 empennage, which is basically it's the tail section of a plane. And then you have the horizontal stabilizers and the vertical stabilizers. So I was making those things. It's pretty good, pretty cool industry to be in. The thing that's interesting is it wasn't just about learning how to make them. My job was to improve how we make them. And so you had to really master your understanding of the way things work today so that you can then think through where the waste is in that process and then improve it. And the way the airline industry works, or the aerospace industry works, is they plan to usually sell their initial product at a loss because they're working down a learning curve. So when they build their business model out, they're thinking about what's going to be the global market for this product long term over the course of many years. And then they'll map out the learning curve for the cost structure, and then they'll strike a line. So they're losing money initially. They're really relying on the industrial engineers and everybody else to drive improvements so that they can get under that line and actually start making a profit on their product. So pretty interesting industry. And for me, I learned a lot of, I would say, foundational skills that have served me like literally over the entire course of my career. Many of the things I learned building airplanes, I've applied in so many industries. It's unbelievable. And even from the basics like scheduling, aerospace, in a lot of ways, the defense industry sort of invented, complex scheduling. And it's surprising how many industries are very similar to aerospace and the way they do production. So, for example, I worked at a company that was building computed tomography for airports. So the machines that your luggage goes through, those are built more or less the same way as airplanes, on a line, scheduled, tack times, all of that. So really interesting stuff. And my experience in aerospace paid off, later on in multiple clients that way. So I think though, again, back to my theme here, which is during these eras, you're picking up lessons along the way. And for me, I learned a lot of the basics of industry, manufacturing in aerospace and at Vought, but also learned a lot on how to deal with people. I mean, it's your first job. You haven't had to deal with people. Aerospace is a little unique because it's also got union labor, and you've got to deal with that. And I remember very distinctly my first day on the job, I'm being shown around to the areas that I was going to be in charge of. And one of the guys who's a labor or a union foreman comes up to me and he says, "Hey, we don't need and I won't use the word he said, but we don't need any bird dogs on this particular unit." And thought it was interesting. So definitely a rough introduction to what it's like to deal with production labor. But that experience of dealing with people is, I think what set me up to do my other jobs later on in life, and ended up really being close to these guys. You know, most of the, if you're in consulting or really anything where you're doing improvement and you're coming in and trying to understand how things work, you usually find that the people who are doing the job have a lot of frustration. And so that particular foreman, he had a lot of frustration and ideas on how to drive improvement in his particular area of the airplane. So they're also a source for great ideas for, you know, improvement. And then one more story from my time at Vought is second time I heard about consulting, and CEO had hired consultants, and everybody hated these consultants. I'm not going to name who it was. It wasn't PwC, but they didn't like these consultants. And the consultants, I would see them on the shop floor. They'd show up on, you know, Monday afternoon, and they'd leave Thursday morning. And I didn't know what they were doing, but they were basically evaluating the productivity of the team and evaluating the people and who was contributing and who was detracting and those kinds of things. And didn't really see the value, but, you know, I was a guy working on the shop floor trying to make airplanes. Then later on, the CEO had an all hands meeting, and we're, you know, thousands of people gathered outside. He's got the podium, and you know, the union workers, they'll say anything. They're protected. One of the union guys raises his hand and says, I want to know how much money we're wasting on these consultants. And the CEO kind of pauses, and then he repeats the question, and he says, the question is, how much money are we wasting on these consultants? And then he paused again, and everybody's kind of looking at him. He says, none. Next question. And that's probably when I realized that, you know, in consulting, you're not necessarily working for all the people that you interact with. You're really working for the executive team. And the reason is they figure out how to make the company more efficient, more profitable, more sustainable, those kinds of things. So that was my second introduction to consulting. But the thing about consulting is a lot of times, at least back in the day, you needed to have an MBA in order to even get a job. And so that's the next thing I did. I think also because as an engineer, you oftentimes get pigeonholed as an engineer. And I would say that depends on the company. I mean, I've worked at, you know, 60 plus companies. Some of them are very technology driven, so the engineers are really running the place. Some of them are sales and marketing driven. Some of them are finance driven. All different kinds of cultures within these companies. But for me, I felt like, you know, my first day on the job, my boss was literally over 30 years older than me. And I thought, I'm not sure there's going to be a lot of opportunity here long term. So kind of wanted to get an MBA to help me break out of that. But definitely getting an MBA gave me a different perspective, built on the capabilities I already had. I already knew how to learn, but I definitely don't think I knew all of the business case sort of aspects of what the executive team are looking for when they're driving a business. And so that helped me get that perspective. I think also you know, looking back, probably some of the more important courses I've taken have been about communication and then organizational behavior. Because at the end of the day, if you want to change things and you want to make improvements, you have to do it through people. And so you have to have a sense of how to convince people to make the change. So that's what I got out of there. By the way, this is my own personal old photo, which I guess definitely does not have a high pixel count, but that's me on the right over there. Okay, so after grad school, I went on to, by the way, I worked while I was in grad school. So I was working building airplanes because they actually want you to pay for grad school. And so I needed to have money to pay for that. But then I went on to PepsiCo, and let's see, this opportunity actually popped up just by networking. So one of my close friends in grad school was working at this company called PepsiCo Food Systems. And at the time, this is historical point here because it doesn't exist anymore, but at the time, Pepsi owned Taco Bell, Pizza Hut, KFC. They would sell their own soda to those restaurants. There were other restaurants too that they owned. Those were spun off to create Yum brands. But for us at PepsiCo Foods, our job was to get the right product to the right place at the right time at the lowest cost. So we were a logistics company, but also a procurement company, a warehousing company, and then also a distribution company and an efficiency company. We also sort of consulted for the restaurants too on their operations. But it was a good time to be in that industry. Of course, logistics has really exploded over the last decade, and in the last 2 years, it's maybe imploded. But there's a lot of innovation that was going on at that time in logistics, and we got to experiment with different technologies. We started doing dynamic routing, which was very innovative at the time. So understanding demand, exactly what your load would be, reverse packing a truck and then doing distribution and changing the routes and all of that stuff daily was pretty interesting and unique. And then we also got to experiment with business models, like how we distribute, what should be distributed on a national level versus, having multiple distribution centers around the country that would get daily shipments. And then, as I said, we did a lot of collaboration with the brands. So for me, first off, I learned a lot about logistics working at PepsiCo Foods. And my role was a project-based role. So it was kind of like consulting. I would do things like change the way we distribute small goods. Or one project I did was designing, building, standing up what at the time was the largest distribution center in the network, which was in Southern California. So, lots of different projects. And but as I mentioned, I kind of had in the back of my mind, what would it be like to be a consultant? A lot of the people at PepsiCo were ex-consultants. So I had some firsthand, experience with them. And then I had a chance to get into consulting and took it right after PepsiCo. So I want to talk a little bit about consulting and what it is. I know that it's hard to get a handle on what it is if you're not in the industry. And I had asked my kids, so I have 3 kids, 2 are in college, 1's in high school now. But when they were little, if you asked them, what does your dad do? It would be what's on the face of it. So you go on trips. He's talking on the phone a lot. I know he's working on the computer. And of course, it's a lot more than that. Consulting is a lot more than that. It's really about rethinking businesses and delivering sustainable outcomes. So rethinking your business and then delivering sustainable outcomes. And it's a lot harder than it sounds because, in my experience, knowing the right answer is only about 20% of the problem. But in fact, most of us, we know the right answer and what to change. The real trick is getting change, because the right answer is best practices. By definition, if it's a best practice, that means somebody else is doing it already. It's metrics, wow, you should have this much cost per person, those kinds of things. The trick is, how do you get there? And for me, it starts with, you have to understand the business. So I alluded to this earlier, but you have to tailor the ideas that you have to your client or to your company, which means you got to understand the culture, the people's attitudes. You have to understand how they work day to day. All of that stuff goes into making change, because ultimately, when we're doing change at a company, we're changing the daily job for a lot of people. And so it is not sustainable change by having an idea. It's only sustainable change if people change the way they act, and then you actually are able to move the needle on profitability or whatever it is that you're trying to improve long term. And usually that means that you're not just reorganizing or people, you're implementing new systems or things, or you're changing the way they use the systems. So it has the potential to touch a lot of people if you're doing it right. But if you are able to look back 2 years later, a year later, and you see that they're doing it the way you asked them to do it, they're seeing improved financial performance, then you know you succeeded. So consulting wise at PwC, first of all, PwC is around 295,000 people, and we expect to grow by 100,000 people over the next 5 years. And it's different kinds of people that we're going to be hiring, a lot more digital and technology in that. But all of us kind of have this similar mission, which is, building trust in these companies and society, and then also making sustainable change. So we have around 55,000 in the US. Around 40,000 of those are doing client-facing consulting and accounting type work that I'm talking about here. And we have many, if you can imagine, 295,000 people. There's all kinds of capabilities within that. PwC is best known for finance and accounting, tax, those kinds of things. But also consulting in general, which we do consulting. If you think of a company, we have specialists in every aspect of a company. And for me, operations is just one sliver of what we do. So we have teams that focus on improving companies today, and then we also have emerging teams that are helping. I think it's helping companies, but it's also helping society really reshape its future. So we have practices around, for example, environmental, social, and governance work, or ESG, which is really will have a gigantic impact on, in particular, carbon around the world. And I'm seeing that even today in operations as companies are rethinking how they make things and who they buy things from, how they do transportation, all of that in the name of lowering their carbon footprint. So there's a lot of great things going on. The other thing about consulting is, and I mentioned this earlier, is the diversity of experience that you get. So I mentioned I have worked at 61 companies, over 160 projects. This is just a sliver of the industries that I've worked in, but you are hired as a consultant for your capabilities and your knowledge, and that's technical capabilities, technical knowledge. In my case, it's operations, so manufacturing and supply chain. But also you're being hired because you have experience in making improvements at companies and helping their people understand the value of change and how to make the change, and sort of being the Sherpa, the business Sherpa, I guess, who's helping people drive improvement. But I can say, as someone who's been both in industry and in consulting, it's very different. It's a very different role. In industry, I was paid to deliver. So I was paid to build airplanes. We were making an airplane every 2.5 days, around that. It varies. So my whole metric for life was making that run rate. Later on, I did a consulting project for a company that was buying an aerospace company. And in that case, we were paid to help them understand, how does that company operate? How could it operate better? How much impact would that make? What are the things you would change if you were to buy this company and start with a green sheet? And it's pretty phenomenal and very different experience to be asked those questions, and to have not just the CEO listening, but actually the people who own the company. This was a private equity transaction, so private equity is buying an aerospace manufacturer. So you have the opportunity to not only transform a company, but you have the opportunity to create a lot of value along the way. And it's just a very different job than being asked to produce every day. They're both valuable jobs, but it's a different kind of skill set. I talked a little bit about operations consulting and what my team does. So I mentioned what is consulting in general. For us at PwC, operations is innovation and engineering, procurement and sourcing, manufacturing, inventory management, distribution, and then fulfillment, so the stores, the last mile. Those are pretty technical areas, and as you can imagine, we have specialists in each area. So we might have people who focus only on manufacturing. I would say, even though I do play across multiple areas, but I'm part of our procurement team, so I spend probably at least half my time on procurement and sourcing type work. So that's what we consider to be operations. But then you might be saying, well, Marc, what is it you guys do? And we work helping companies rethink the way they operate. So if you're doing that, then you're thinking, number one, about their operating strategy. And that could be it's questions like, where should I be set up? Where should I do engineering in the world? Should engineering be in different capabilities of engineering be in different places? What's the right mix? Where are my competitors doing it? Should I have centers of excellence around the world? So those kind of questions that really shape how you're going to structure your business. That's the first level. We help them think about their organization. So it's not just the capabilities of the people, the number of the people, where are the people, all of those kinds of things. How do you train the people? Business processes, which is fundamental to the work we do, is helping companies rethink how they want to operate to be more efficient. And I would say efficient's the word I use, but probably effective is a better word to use, because cost is one aspect, but if you're effective, operations can actually help you grow your revenue. So it's not only about cost. And then the last piece is technology, which we do spend a lot of time helping companies, once they've thought through how they want to operate, the kind of people they're going to have. If you haven't codified that in your technology or in your IT systems, it's probably not going to last long. So we almost always are doing some kind of information technology implementations on the back end of these operations improvement programs. Okay, I figured I'd give a couple of examples of projects that I've worked in, just to give you a flavor for consulting. So I have a couple that I wanted to talk about. The first one is, it's really a digital example. And, with companies in consulting, you can imagine, in a way, we get to select our customers or our clients, but in another way, they select us because they have something they want to solve. So it could be companies that are sick, that need to improve their profitability. It could be companies that are being bought or sold. Probably, I don't know, over my history, maybe 15-20% of the projects I've done have been related to mergers and acquisitions. It could be that the board of directors doesn't think management is performing well, all kinds of reasons. In this case, the situation was that it was actually a really healthy company. A healthy company, profitable, growing, but I don't know if you've picked up the newspaper lately. Everyone's talking about digital operations and digital supply chain. And they had a new chief technology officer who said, I want us to be the luminary in applying digital to this industry. This industry was paper and corrugate. And it's a very, for a manufacturing process that's 2,000 years old, it's very complex. You have gigantic mills, and basically the whole factory or the whole mill is the machine. So most of the time when people think about digital, they're talking about things like pulling data off a machine and improving that machine. In a process industries, you have to improve the whole factory. So from the time at the front end of these processes, you have a bunch of wood getting mixed in water and creating this pulp that's then flowing through a bunch of machines to eventually be paper on rolls. So it's very complex, and there are many machines along the way, and it's highly susceptible to the environment. I mean, it's paper, right? So paper is affected by humidity and temperature and all these other things. So there's literally thousands of variables. And the good news is most factories have thousands of sensors all already built into the factory. And so the trick is, how do you use that data in a cogent way? And in this case, we were able to pull all of this sensor data, build out use cases that we wanted to fix. So the first one was, hey, the paper is tearing at the end. When the paper tears, I have to stop the machines, refeed it. That's a real problem for productivity. How can I reduce the number of tears in the paper? And you build a study around it, just like you would imagine. You at this, because it's we're applying digital, we're taking all of the sensor data all along the manufacturing process, including all of the ambient temperature and humidity information, feeding that up into an analytics tool in the cloud, and then running cases and bringing that information back and sort of working back to a root cause analysis. And eventually, once you understand that, you're able to build a model that will, in real time, inform the people to adjust the machines. And even in the future, probably adjust the machines without having human intervention. Right now, there's usually human intervention required to do that. But this is an area that I 100% passionately believe every manufacturer will be applying analytics to their manufacturing process in the future, every single one. And it's becoming democratized. The cost of these analytics tools is making it easier to adopt. It's still kind of complex to implement, which is why you have consultants doing it right now. But for this company, I mentioned how old these processes are. They improved their throughput or their output 15%. So 15%, imagine that you're able to do that. If you're a CEO, that means if I improve, say, call it, what is that, 7 or 8 factories, 15%, I don't have to build that ninth factory. So it's a gigantic improvement, not just on productivity, but also reduces the amount of capital that they have to spend in the future. And it makes it just overall a much more profitable business and more reliable for your customers. So that's one case, and that's more, I would say, cutting edge, but it was very focused on one area. The next case I wanted to talk about, by the way, this is out of the 166, right? So there's a lot of things I could talk about. This one is more typical. And I say more typical because, it's very rare that you work at a company and they have one very focused problem. Usually problems they don't even understand the problems usually. And problems are usually going across multiple functions of an organization. And, first step usually is actually defining the problem in the right way that you can address it. And so this company was an unbelievably successful company, still is. And they make heavy equipment for the energy industry. And they were growing like you wouldn't believe, over 100% per year. And what happened was their backlog had grown. So the executive team is looking at their backlog. They're saying there is so much demand for our product. We are actually losing sales because we can't make things fast enough. And we seem to be at a peak, like we can't get any better. We need someone to come in and take a look at this. And so for me, I view that as a classic operations, kind of problem solving exercise. You don't even really know what the cause is at all. But the way we approached it was we went in, we broke down all of those processes I talked about earlier, from engineering all the way through delivery and logistics. We developed root cause perspectives on every element and why is it or is it not performing to where you'd expect it to. And then we launched with that leadership team several improvement work streams, touching a lot of areas of the business, touching engineering and how these are usually custom design products. So how they receive information from their customers, how do they customize their designs, how do they do that design process, on through quality. So what are the manufacturing processes they have in place and why was quality deteriorating, manufacturing throughput, you name it. And I put some of the numbers here on just improvement, but the bottom line was phenomenal improvement across several areas of operations that ultimately made a big difference in the profitability of the company, mostly because I mentioned earlier they were losing sales. So just imagine how much more profitable you'd be if you could sell 50% or 100% more product. And in a very cyclical industry, you want to capture as much of it at the peak as you can, because eventually things are going to go back down to normal. So another example where operations isn't just about cost cutting. Operations is also about helping growth and sustainability of a business overall. Okay, so those are my case examples, and I thought it might be interesting to talk just a little bit about what consulting firms are looking for. And it varies. I mean, you can imagine if we have 290,000 people, we have a lot of different capabilities. So there's no one cookie cutter candidate, but for operations anyway, we're looking for people who have usually an engineering undergrad. It could be different capabilities within engineering. We look for an MBA, but we don't require an MBA. We have levels, so if you're an engineering undergrad, you come in as an associate, and that's the way it works at most firms. If you're an MBA, you come in as a senior associate, with the hypothesis being you've actually worked in between there some, so you have a sense of how business works, kind of like my path was. We like to see direct experience in operations. So people can have an engineering degree and then they went to maybe work in private equity or banking. That wouldn't be a great fit for us. We'd probably consider it, but it would be much better to have procurement or supply chain or manufacturing experience. That's what we're looking for. Again, consultants get paid for their experience. That's why you're paid. And then I think, I mentioned this, but advanced analytics, that's the future of business. It's definitely the present of consulting. And so having familiarity with analytics tools, data visualization, those are key to being able to persuade people that you know what you're talking about, you have the facts, you've analyzed them, and you're also convincing them to do things differently, and you know the impact that it's going to have. So that really speaks to the qualities that you need in a consultant. So you need them to be analytical. They have to have great communication skills, and then regrettably, as consultants, you work a lot. So you have to be a self-motivated kind of person. You really have to be the kind of person who's curious, I would say. You have to be curious and wanting to just understand the way things work and how they could work better. If that's your personality, you probably would be a good consultant. So all of that said, I'm going to stop here and ask Jeremy, do we have any questions on the line?
I do have a couple questions, Marc, and thanks very much for this presentation. It's been really interesting. You hear about consultants all the time, but you don't really see sort of that underbelly or how the sausage is made part of consulting. So it's really been kind of interesting hearing the things that you've done in your career. So back when you were talking about it first with PepsiCo, you were talking about project consulting, and now you're towards the end here, you're talking about operations consulting. So what are the pros and cons between being somebody that works in projects consulting versus operations consulting?
Yeah. Well, I would say here's the main distinction between those two is that one's an internal consultant, and then the other one is an external consultant. And I don't think it's fair, but it's a lot harder for internal consultants to get the attention of their leadership and the attention of, I guess, the people that they're trying to change. You know, it can be done. I have a client today that they basically hire us to give them ideas and strategies. But when it comes to execution, which is what, you know, internal projects people do, they take it. I mean, I've talked to him last week, in fact, and I said how frustrating it is that you guys are so good at getting things done. I would like to be the one getting that stuff done for you, but it doesn't always happen. So, you know, when I was at PepsiCo, later on, did similar work, similar industry, except now instead of trying to push things through at the managers and the directors level, I was talking to the CEO. I mean, the CEO, if the CEO says do it, usually people do it. And that's, I think, the distinction is you're really working on a business imperative instead of someone's improvement idea.
Gotcha. So it's an access thing as much as everything is in business at this point, where the better access you have, the higher up the ladder you can talk. Obviously, the better or the easier it is for you to get heard and maybe see some results, I suppose. So when you were talking about the operations areas, there were 6 of those. Are you versed in all 6, or is it always very much like you said? Most of your stuff was in. I forget which one you said, but like as a consultant, are you versed in anything, and you can just be sent out on any job, or are you sort of pigeonholed into one of those?
That's a good question. So I like to joke with with new hires, people who are right out of school, you're really fungible. You're really fungible. You know, you've learned how to learn, basically, and you know some basics of operations and engineering. And so I joke around with my team. It's like I don't care what you're working on. I want you to have fingers on keyboard, drinking Red Bull late into the night, doing analytics. That's what you're doing, and you can do that across a number of these capabilities. And in fact, that's the way we operate. If you have the skill to do the analytics, then you can be working in different areas. As you progress, you become more specialized. Like just like everything in life, you become more specialized. And it makes sense because we think about an executive, you might be talking to a chief operating officer about improving their manufacturing. They're going to want to know that you actually know manufacturing, not that you just know how to solve problems. So you're going to start out and see a lot of different industries, a lot of different functional capabilities, and you have an opportunity to put your hand on the rudder and sort of choose what you're passionate about. Because if you're passionate about it, you're definitely going to be more excited and more successful about it too. And so that's the other thing about consulting, you kind of dictate your own career in a way. And that's actually how we grow too. People have ideas, they come up with new ideas, they're passionate about it. Hey, we should be doing this, and we experiment with it, and we love that.
Fantastic. And I'll stop for just a second and encourage anybody that's watching, if you have any questions, go ahead and type them into the Q&A so we can get those answered for you. How do you gain an understanding of a business? So like you're going into this company, and then whenever that project's over, you got to go into another company. Do you understand their business before going in? Is it just you want to go in cold so you see what you see and it's not tarnished by something? Is it something where, if you're going into, say, a manufacturing company, like everything there is to know about the manufacturing industry and their best practices and stuff like that? How do you get to know those businesses and those industries?
That's a good point. So what I didn't mention was when I first got into consulting, it was a different firm called PRTM, and we were only operations people. So basically every single person at the firm was just like me. They had an engineering undergrad and then had an MBA from a top school. So we were all exactly the same. And we would go in and solve problems by being really smart, learning about that business, knowing best practices, that kind of thing. At PwC, we have so much more capabilities that we can pull into these efforts. So, Marc is an engineer with an MBA. He focuses on manufacturing. But if I really want to solve the problem right, first of all, we probably have people who only work at that company or in that industry. So we bring them into the effort. And then secondly, we have people who specialize in, again, manufacturing and supply chain today. You can almost guarantee it's a global affair. And if you're rethinking a company's footprint and you're not thinking about tax or tariff or other kind of international global trade implications, you're doing it wrong. And so almost every operations project, we also have tax people helping and conferring on that project. And I've been doing that I joined PwC 10 years ago. So about 10 years, my first project, I was working in Kuala Lumpur, and we were looking at a footprint of a manufacturer. Where should things be? PwC had tax experts, China, Singapore, all the way down to Papua New Guinea to tell us what would be the implications. And if we ran through scenarios, the third most efficient scenario for the company operations-wise, third most efficient was actually the most profitable. So that's why if you're not thinking about it holistically, you're probably getting the right answer. And it's a long way to answer your question, but you have to sort of, it takes a village, I guess, is the answer. You need to bring all those capabilities into a program.
Totally makes sense. Again, I'll call for any, kind of make a last call for any potential questions, but I just have one more for you, Marc. So you've been doing this for a long time, 160 projects, 60 or so companies that you've worked with. Why? Why do you keep doing it? What's the fun part of your job? What's the part that you wake up in the morning and you're like, yippee, I get to go to work? What makes you tick?
Yeah. Do you like to do the same thing every day? Probably not. You like to have diversity of experience. So sometimes, everybody wakes up and they say, oh man, I can't do this again. And I've done that. But what the difference is that, if I have a very terrible client and a very unlikable, environment, I'm always walking away from it. I know eventually I'm going to finish the project. The people who are in that, they have to live that every day. So for me, it's about doing different things, different people, different problems. The upside is that you're the person who's the change agent, who's getting to make improvements. The downside is you're not always there to see the fruit of your labor. Hopefully, I've had a few clients anyway who have called me up and said, hey, Marc, you remember that work 3 years ago? Thank you. But most of the time, we're working anonymously in the background to make somebody else look good, but that's okay. So I think I first went in thinking, hey, I'll probably do this 2 years. And in that 2 years, I bet it's worth 5 years of experience on my career, But then you get into it and you realize, hey, it's pretty fun. It's pretty fun stuff. And I really like the people you're working with. And because it's project based, it's a little bit like going to battle together, so you really know each other well. And it's a good experience.
Fantastic. Well, Marc Waco, thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to have our alumni on with us, especially for these virtual brown bags, sharing experience, talking about the industry that they're in. We appreciate your time today, and have a great weekend. And everybody else out there, again, please be sure to check out the entire schedule for the rest of the year at the URL that's in the Q&A. This will be posted a little bit later today or by next week anyway, so that you can watch it again if you really want to go back and get some more answers out of your questions. Again, thanks very much, and we'll talk to you later.
Thank you.